The prairie stretched out like a forgotten secret, under a sky that looked heavy enough to fall. A lone wagon creaked along a track that was barely there, cutting through the endless grass. Inside sat a woman named Evelyn Crowther. She kept herself small, hunched over the reins, a wide-brimmed hat hiding her face. But it couldn't hide everything. A scarf was tied loose around her jaw, but you could still see the scars. Angry pink skin that crawled up her cheek. Her hands were wrapped in thin gloves, even though the air was turning cool. Every bump in the road was a jolt of pain. But she kept going. Her eyes were fixed on a tiny cluster of lights in the distance. A town. A place that would either take her in or cast her out. There was no in-between, not for someone like her. As she got closer, the silence of the prairie gave way to the hum of people. Smoke from chimneys, a dog barking, a tinny piano playing a sad tune in a saloon. These sounds weren't a comfort. They were a warning. People meant questions. She stopped the wagon at the edge of town, listening. A child's laugh, the clang of a hammer on an anvil. She pulled her shawl tighter, covering what she could. Then she clicked her tongue, and the horse moved forward, pulling her into the light. And into their stares. Heads turned, they always did. The lantern light caught her scars, turning them into pale, ugly ribbons. Two cowboys stopped talking. One of them smirked. A mother pulled her little girl closer, her eyes lingering just long enough to feel like a slap. This was her welcome. This was her life now. At the town inn, a woman named Rosemary McGraw wiped flour on her apron. "Evening," she said. Her voice wasn't mean, but it wasn't kind either. It was just curious. Evelyn just nodded. She asked for a room, paid her coins, and got a key, and a look that sized her up and found her wanting. The room was small and smelled of old quilts. She set down her meager belongings. A cast-iron pan, some flour, a tin of coffee, the bare bones of a life. She busied herself, just to keep her hands from shaking. Then she sat on the bed, gloves still on, and let the quiet press in. A storm was rumbling in the distance, getting closer. She had her story ready, the one she told everyone. She'd fallen from the wagon. The cooking fire had done the rest. It was a simple lie, much simpler than the truth. Much easier than trying to explain a man whose anger could strike a match and hold it to your skin while you begged. Later, when the inn was quiet, she stepped outside. The air was cool now. She built a small fire in the pit in the yard, her bandaged fingers moving carefully. The firelight danced on her face, softening the scars. She stared into the flames, trying to see a future there. And that's when she felt it, not a sound. Just the feeling of being watched. Across the street, a man stood by a fence post. He was huge, broad-shouldered, still as a tree, a long coat, a hat pulled down low. In the flickering light of her fire, he looked immense. But there was no threat in the way he stood. Just watchfulness. She didn't know his name yet. Jedediah Kane. He was a rancher from the South Ridge, a man the town whispered about. They said he could break a wild horse with just a look. He didn't talk much. He didn't have to. Tonight, he just watched her. Not with pity. Not with cruelty. Their eyes met for just a second. Her heart hammered in her chest. She quickly looked back at the fire. She knew hunger when she saw it in a man's eyes. She knew cruelty. She knew pity. This was none of those things. This was something else entirely. And she had no idea what to do with it. The next morning, the town woke up with a new piece of gossip. The burned woman. Arrived alone. Too proud to ask for help. At the general store, Mrs. Billings whispered that tragedy followed women like her. A stable hand said she looked like she'd been through hell and brought a piece of it with her. Evelyn heard the whispers. She kept her head down. She found work where she could, frying biscuits for drovers who were too hungry to care about her face. Food was her shield. It was a language without words. When people were eating, they usually forgot to ask questions. But Doc Harland Ree didn't forget. He came to her table at the inn, his voice gentle. "Those burns need tending, miss. They'll heal slower if you keep them wrapped so tight." His kindness was so unexpected, it felt like a trap. "They're fine," she mumbled, turning away. She couldn't let him see. She couldn't let anyone see the truth of what had been done to her. That evening, the storm finally rolled in. The wind picked up, smelling of rain. Evelyn stood outside, watching the purple clouds gather. And then he was there again. Jedediah Kane. Across the way, silent as a ghost. This time, he tipped his hat. Just a tiny dip of the brim. It wasn't a greeting. It wasn't an invitation. It was just an acknowledgement. "I see you." Something inside her, a wall she'd built brick by painful brick, developed the tiniest crack. For months, she had been invisible, a monster hiding in the shadows. Now, someone was looking right at her, scars and all, and not turning away. She didn't smile. She didn't wave back. But she felt a shift inside her, like the ground settling after an earthquake. Thunder cracked, and she hurried back inside. From her window, she saw him one last time as lightning lit up the sky. He was still there, tall and alone, as the rain started to fall. He just stood there, watching, until she moved away from the glass. She pressed her hand to the cool window pane. The lie she told herself, the story about the wagon and the fire, felt thin and fragile tonight. Because somewhere out there in the storm stood a man who looked at her like he already knew she was lying. And that scared her more than anything. But it also gave her a strange, terrifying flicker of hope. Dawn came pale and damp. Evelyn woke early, her hands stiff and aching. She built her small fire in the yard, and soon the smell of bacon and coffee filled the morning air. The hungry men came as they always did. They ate, they paid, and they tried not to stare. Around mid-morning, a shadow fell over her cooking station. It was Jedediah Kane. Up close, he was even bigger, shoulders like a barn door. His face was weathered by the sun, lined with silence, not cruelty. He didn't say a word at first. He just took off his hat, nodded, and set a few coins on her makeshift table. "Coffee and whatever's hot," he said. His voice was a low rumble. She served him, her hands shaking slightly. She was intensely aware of him watching her every move. But he wasn't looking at her scars. He was looking at her work, the way she handled the skillet, the neatness of her tools. He ate slowly, with a quiet patience that felt like a gift. "You ride far?" she asked, the words surprising her. "South Ridge," he answered. "Cattle drive." He took another bite of biscuit. "Food's good." That was it, just a simple compliment. But it hit her like a physical blow, to be spoken to like a person, not a tragedy, not a monster. A knot of emotion tightened in her throat. Before she could think of a reply, other customers arrived, and he was gone as quietly as he'd come. He left too much money behind. The day wore on. The sun beat down. The whispers followed her everywhere. At the mercantile, she heard Mrs. Billings again. "Says a wagon tipped. I say it was a man. Some men have a temper." Then came the thin, sharp sound of laughter. Evelyn's cheeks burned hotter than her scars. Later, she was struggling to fix a broken wheel on her wagon. The wood splintered in her hand. She swore under her breath, her frustration boiling over. A quiet cough. Jedediah was there. "Need a hand?" She wanted to say no. Pride and fear screamed at her to refuse. But she was just so tired. "It stuck," she admitted. He didn't say another word. He just stepped forward, and with a few effortless movements, he fixed the wheel. He set the pin, gave it a firm tap, and nodded once. "Done." "Thank you," she managed to say. He met her eyes for just a second, a look so direct it stole her breath. Then he tipped his hat and walked away. No questions, no long pitying stares, just help, freely given. That night Rosemary, the innkeeper, cornered her in the kitchen. "That Cain's a strange one," she said, her voice a little too casual. "Quiet. Folks say he can be dangerous when he's pushed." Evelyn kept scrubbing a pan. "He fixed my wagon." "Men don't help for nothing," Rosemary said, her words sharp. "Just mind yourself." The warning echoed in her head. The next day, Jedediah came again. This time, he didn't bring coins. He brought a small sack of flour and set it on her table. A payment or a gift? She didn't know. She just nodded stiffly and cooked his breakfast. He never stayed long, just long enough for his quiet presence to start feeling normal. It was a dangerous feeling. Later that afternoon, she was in the general store. A group of young cowhands were joking around. One of them saw her, and his eyes went straight to her scars. He muttered something to his friends, and they all snickered. The air turned sour and ugly. Before she could turn and run, a huge shadow filled the doorway. Jedediah. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. He just stood there, towering over them, and his silent gaze swept across the group. The laughter died instantly. The smirks vanished. The cowhands suddenly found their boots very interesting. Evelyn's heart was racing, but for the first time, it wasn't just from fear. It was something else. She bought her things, her head held high, and walked out. He didn't follow her. He just stayed there, a silent guardian, until she was gone. That night, in her room, she unwrapped her hands. The skin was shiny and red. She thought of Doc Ree's kind offer of salve. She thought of Jedediah's quiet help. She thought of the way the laughter had stopped. She wasn't crying. This was something deeper than tears. It was the first, fragile feeling of self-respect she'd had in years. But Rosemary's words came back to her. Men don't help for nothing. Was this kindness just another kind of cage? She looked out her window, toward the dark southern ridge where his ranch was. She felt the weight of her lie, the one about the wagon accident. It felt heavier now, because Jedediah looked at her like he knew it wasn't true. She was starting to feel like he saw everything. A few days later, she was cleaning up after the morning rush when she noticed something tucked under the flour sack he'd left. It was a small, folded piece of leather. Curious, she opened it. Inside was a faded photograph. A woman with kind eyes and a tired smile, holding a small child. On the back, in faint, spidery script, were 2 words, "My Sarah." Evelyn's blood ran cold. The woman in the picture, she had a scar, a thin white line that ran from her temple down her cheek. It was old, faded, but it was there. Suddenly, his watchfulness, his silence, his kindness, it all clicked into place in the most terrifying way. This wasn't about her at all. He wasn't seeing her. He was seeing someone else, a ghost from his past, and that meant his kindness wasn't a gift. It was a debt he was trying to pay to a woman who was long gone. The thought left her breathless. She wasn't being seen. She was being replaced. The prairie summer settled in, long and hot. The days hummed with the sound of cicadas. Evelyn had found a rhythm. She cooked. She survived. The town's whispers had mostly died down, turning into a kind of grudging acceptance. She was the burned woman who made good biscuits. It was better than being a monster. Jedediah kept coming. He never mentioned the photograph, and she never asked. She'd tucked it away, a secret she didn't know what to do with. His presence was a strange mix of comfort and poison. He would bring her things, a sack of beans, a coil of rope, silent offerings that felt heavy with unspoken meaning. Their conversations were small, about the weather or the cattle, but underneath, the silence was deafening. He was watching her, but who was he really seeing? Sarah? One evening, after everyone had gone, he stayed behind, leaning against the fence as she cleaned her skillet. "You cook like you've done it your whole life," he said into the quiet. "It's kept me alive," she answered, the words more true than he knew. He nodded, his gaze on the horizon. It's a good skill to have. The quiet between them felt different now, tainted. She felt like an actress in a play she hadn't auditioned for. Was he waiting for her to be someone she wasn't? Rosemary's warnings didn't help. Big men like that, they carry big sorrows, she said one afternoon, watching Jedediah ride out of town. You be careful you don't become one of them. Evelyn was trying, but his quiet acts of service were relentless. A broken stove hinge was fixed before she woke up. A fresh barrel of water appeared when hers ran low. It was smothering. Every kind act felt like he was erasing her, painting over her with the memory of this Sarah. One day at the general store, she overheard two ranchers' wives. That Jedediah Kane sure spends a lot of time with the burned woman, one said. It's a shame what happened to his wife. Fire took her, you know, and their child. The floor seemed to drop out from under Evelyn. A fire, her lie, the one she told everyone. I fell from a wagon, the cooking fire did the rest. Was it just a coincidence? Or was it something else? Had he heard her lie and seen it as some kind of sign, a second chance? Her head spun. This was worse than she imagined. He wasn't just seeing a ghost. He was trying to rewrite history, using her as the ink. That evening, she couldn't stand it anymore. She saw him mending a fence near the inn, and she marched right over to him. You have to stop, she said, her voice shaking. He paused, hammer in hand. Stop what? Fixing things for me, bringing me things, watching me. He looked genuinely confused. You needed help. You don't know what I need, she burst out. Why are you doing this? Is it because of her? Because of Sarah? The name hung in the air between them, sharp and cold. For the first time since she'd met him, the calm in his eyes shattered. It was replaced by a deep, raw pain that was so naked it made her want to look away. He slowly set the hammer down. How do you know that name? He asked, his voice dangerously quiet. I found the picture, she confessed, her heart pounding. A fire, Jedediah. They said she died in a fire, just like my story. He closed his eyes for a long moment. When he opened them, the pain was still there, but it was contained now, locked away behind his usual stillness. The fire. It took her, he said, his voice rough. It was my fault, I wasn't there. I was out on a cattle drive chasing dollars when I should have been home. He looked at her then, and for the first time, she felt like he was truly seeing her. When you came here, with your scars, telling that story, I thought it was a sign from God, a chance to do right, to watch over someone, to not fail again. The confession was so simple, so honest, it completely disarmed her. He wasn't trying to replace his wife, he was trying to atone for his failure as a husband. He was trying to save the woman he couldn't save before. I'm not her, Evelyn whispered, the words tasting like ash. I'm not your second chance. I know, he said, and his gaze was steady. I see that now. He took a step back, giving her space. I'm sorry, Evelyn. I never meant to cause you harm. He turned and walked away, his huge shoulders slumped, leaving her standing alone in the dusty yard, with a truth that was more complicated and heartbreaking than she could ever have imagined. She had wanted to push him away, to break the strange spell he had over her. But now, watching him go, all she felt was a profound and aching loneliness. He wasn't a threat. He was just a man as haunted as she was, and his confession had just changed everything. In the days that followed, a new kind of quiet settled between them. The air was cleared of ghosts, but filled with a fragile, awkward truth. Jedediah stopped leaving gifts. He stopped watching from a distance. When he came for breakfast, he met her eyes, and there was a sadness there, but also a new respect. He was finally seeing Evelyn, and Evelyn, in turn, started to see him not as a savior or a threat, but as a man. A good man, wrestling with a grief so large it had shaped his entire world. She started making small changes. She stopped wearing the scarf all the time, letting the sun and the air touch her face. She started using the salve Doc Ree had given her, and the tight, angry skin on her hands began to soften. Each small act was a claim. This is my face. These are my hands. This is my life. The town noticed. The nods she got were a little warmer. The children who watched her cook seemed less afraid. She even shared a brief, genuine laugh with Rosemary over a stray dog that stole a biscuit. She was building something here. Not a fortress. A home. But you can't outrun your past forever. It has a way of finding you. One crisp autumn morning, a rider appeared on the horizon. He rode tall in the saddle, with an easy arrogance that made Evelyn's stomach clench before she could even see his face. The way he held his shoulders, the confident line of his body. She knew. Her breath caught in her throat. Clyde Mercer. The world went silent, except for the frantic drumming of her own heart. She wanted to run, to hide, to disappear. For weeks, she had let herself believe she was safe. She had been a fool. Jedediah was coming out of the livery. He saw the look on her face, then followed her gaze to the approaching rider. He went still. The calm in his eyes was replaced by something cold and dangerous. A coiled stillness, like a predator getting ready to strike. He didn't move toward her. He didn't say a word. He just stood there, a silent, massive presence, waiting. Clyde was close enough now for her to see his face. The same handsome features, the same cruel smirk. He scanned the small town with a look of ownership, as if it were all his for the taking. His eyes found her, and his smirk widened. "Girl, you ain't ever leaving me," his voice echoed in her memory. Beside the livery, Jedediah's hand rested on a fence post. It looked casual, but Evelyn saw the tension in his knuckles. He was ready. He was giving her the space to choose what happened next. And in that space, with the man who had burned her world to the ground riding straight for her, and the man who had tried to save a ghost standing watch, Evelyn felt the fragile strength she had pieced together tremble. But this time, it didn't break. Clyde swung down from his horse, his spurs jingling. "Well, well, look what I found," he said, his voice dripping with false charm. "Playing pioneer, Evie?" Her whole body screamed at her to run, but she held her ground, her hand tightened on the handle of her skillet. "You're not welcome here, Clyde." He laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Not welcome? After everything I did for you?" He took a step closer. "You're ungrateful, and you're a thief." A thief? The accusation was so bizarre it momentarily stunned her. "What are you talking about?" "Don't play dumb," he sneered, his eyes darting around the yard. "You know what you took. The papers. From my father's desk. Where are they?" Papers? She had no idea what he meant. When she fled, she had taken nothing but the clothes on her back and her small bundle of supplies. Was he insane? Before she could answer, Jedediah finally moved. He didn't rush. He just walked over, his steps slow and deliberate, and stood beside her. He was a mountain next to Clyde's lean frame. "The lady asked you to leave," Jedediah said, his voice a low rumble. Clyde looked Jedediah up and down, a flicker of unease in his eyes. But his arrogance won out. "This is between me and my wife," he said, the word wife a slap in the face. "I am not your wife," Evelyn said, her voice shaking but clear. "Not anymore." "You are whatever I say you are," Clyde snapped, his temper finally showing. "And you're going to give me what's mine, my land." He lunged for her. It happened fast. Jedediah didn't throw a punch. He just moved, putting his body between them, and shoved Clyde back. It was like watching a boulder move a stick. Clyde stumbled, catching himself before he fell, his face twisted with rage. "You'll regret that," he spat, reaching inside his coat. But the town had been watching. Marshal Tate Boone stepped out from his office, his hand resting on the butt of his pistol. "That's enough, friend," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Time to ride on." Doc Ree was on his porch. Rosemary was in the doorway of the inn. A few ranchers had stopped what they were doing. Clyde was surrounded, not by threats, but by silent, watchful eyes. He was outnumbered. He glared at Evelyn, his eyes burning with hate. "This isn't over. I'll be back for what's mine." He spat in the dust, climbed back on his horse, and galloped out of town. The silence he left behind was heavy. Jedediah turned to her. "Are you all right?" She nodded, though she was trembling from head to toe. "The papers. The land. I don't know what he was talking about." Jedediah's brow was furrowed. "What did he say? Papers from his father's desk?" "Yes," she said. "A deed, I think he meant. But I never took anything." A strange look crossed Jedediah's face, a flicker of something she couldn't read. "Recognition?" "Mercer," he said almost to himself. "What was his father's name?" "Elias Mercer," Evelyn answered. "Why?" Jedediah's face went pale under his tan. He stared off in the direction Clyde had gone, and the look in his eyes was no longer just protective. It was something older, something darker. "Elias Mercer," he repeated, his voice barely a whisper. "That man. He stole my family's land." The world tilted on its axis. This wasn't about her anymore. It had never just been about her. Clyde wasn't just her abuser. Jedediah wasn't just her protector. Their pasts were tangled together in a way she could never have imagined. Clyde had accused her of stealing a deed that Jedediah now believed belonged to his family. She was trapped in the middle of a feud that had started before she was even born, and Clyde had promised he would be back. The story Jedediah told her that night was quiet and full of holes, like a history worn thin by time and grief. His grandfather had owned a large parcel of land just south of the ridge. Good water, good grazing. But Elias Mercer, Clyde's father, was a clever man with slick lawyers. He'd found a loophole, a flaw in the original survey, and he'd taken the land. Legally, they said. But Jedediah's family had always called it what it was: theft. It had broken his grandfather's spirit. The loss had haunted their family for generations. "We could never prove it," Jedediah said, staring into the flames of her small fire. "The original survey maps, the old deeds, they all disappeared. Mercer claimed they were lost in a fire at the county records office." Another fire. The word sent a shiver down Evelyn's spine. It seemed every shadow in her life was cast by flames. "So, when Clyde said you took papers from his father's desk," Jedediah trailed off. "He's wrong," Evelyn insisted. "When I left, I ran. I didn't think to take anything. I just wanted to get away." But even as she said it, a strange memory surfaced. In the chaos of that final night, the night of the fire Clyde had set, she remembered grabbing her satchel. It had been near his father's old roll-top desk. She'd just scooped up her things, her hands shaking, adrenaline making everything a blur. Was it possible? Had she accidentally swept some papers into her bag without realizing it? The thought was dizzying. If she had them, if she had the proof Jedediah's family had been searching for all these years, then Clyde's return wasn't just about controlling her. It was about business. It was about silencing the only person who could expose his family's lie. It meant he wouldn't just threaten her. He would do whatever it took to get those papers back. "I need to look," she said, her voice tight. She went to her wagon and pulled out the worn leather satchel she'd carried all this way. Her hands trembled as she dumped its contents onto a blanket. The cast iron pan, the coffee tin, a spare dress, and at the very bottom, folded and creased, was a bundle of papers she'd never even noticed, tucked into a pocket of the lining. They were old, the paper yellowed and brittle. One was a hand-drawn map. The other was a deed, with a signature at the bottom that was barely legible. Kane. Jedediah took the papers from her, his big hands surprisingly gentle. He stared at them for a long time, his face a mask of disbelief and a slowly dawning, righteous anger. "This is it," he whispered. "This is the original deed, the proof." He looked at her, and the raw emotion in his eyes was overwhelming. Gratitude, anger, hope, all mixed together. "Evelyn," he began, but he couldn't seem to find the words. This changed everything. He now had a weapon against the Mercer family, but it also put Evelyn in even greater danger. Clyde wasn't just a scorned man anymore. He was a cornered animal, fighting to protect his family's stolen legacy. The next few days were taut with unspoken tension. The whole town seemed to be holding its breath. They knew Clyde would be back. The question was when and what he would do when he returned. Jedediah didn't leave her side. He was no longer just a protector. He was a partner in a battle that had suddenly become his own. He took the papers to Marshal Tate Boone, who looked them over, his face grim. "This is serious," Tate said, "but a property dispute is a civil matter. Unless Mercer breaks the law, my hands are tied." They knew Clyde wouldn't play by the law's rules. The waiting was the worst part. Every rider on the horizon made Evelyn's heart leap into her throat. Every night, she lay awake, listening to the wind, wondering if this would be the night he returned. He came at dusk 3 days later, and he didn't come alone. He had 4 other men with him, rough-looking types with cold eyes and guns on their hips. They rode into town, not with arrogance, but with grim purpose. They weren't here to talk. They stopped in the middle of the main street, the setting sun at their backs, casting them in long, menacing shadows. "Evelyn!" Clyde's voice boomed through the quiet town. "I know you're in there. You have something that belongs to me. Bring it out now, and we can end this peacefully." Doors slammed shut up and down the street. Faces appeared in windows. The town was scared. Evelyn and Jedediah were in the inn. Jedediah stood by the window, his rifle in his hands. He was calm, but it was the calm of a thunderstorm about to break. "He can't get away with this," Jedediah said, his voice low and hard. "What are we going to do?" Evelyn whispered. Jedediah looked from the men in the street back to her. His fight was for the land, for his family's name. But her fight was for her life, for her freedom. He saw the terror in her eyes, but he also saw something else, the same steel she'd shown before. "He thinks he can bully you, bully this whole town," Jedediah said. "He thinks because he has money and hired guns, he can take whatever he wants. He's wrong." Just then, Marshal Boone stepped out of his office, his shotgun held loosely at his side. "Clyde," he called out, "you and your boys need to move along. You're disturbing the peace." Clyde laughed. "We're not leaving without my property." He gestured toward the inn. "She has it. Send her out." The marshal stood his ground. "That's not going to happen." One of Clyde's men shifted his hand toward his gun. The tension in the street was so thick you could taste it. It was going to explode. And then, something unexpected happened. Doc Ree stepped out onto his porch, holding an old hunting rifle. He didn't look like a threat, but he didn't look scared either. Then the door to the mercantile opened, and the owner came out, his face pale but determined, also armed. From the livery, 2 stable hands appeared, clutching pitchforks like weapons. And then Rosemary McGraw stepped out of the inn. In her hands was her grandfather's old, heavy horse pistol. She stood on the porch, her jaw set. One by one, the people of the town emerged from their homes and businesses. They weren't an army. They were just ordinary people, armed with old guns and farm tools. But they were standing together. They had watched Evelyn rebuild her life. They had seen Jedediah's quiet strength. And they had decided, in that silent, crucial moment, that this was their town, and they would not let it be ruled by fear. Clyde looked around at the growing crowd, his smirk finally faltering. He had expected a frightened woman and a lone rancher. He hadn't expected a community. Inside the inn, Evelyn watched in disbelief. These people, who had once whispered about her and stared at her scars, were now risking their lives for her. A wave of emotion so powerful it almost buckled her knees washed over her. She looked at Jedediah. "It's my fight," she said. She took the deed from the table. "I have to end it." Before he could stop her, she pushed open the doors of the inn and stepped out onto the porch. The street went silent. All eyes were on her. She held up the papers, her hand steady. "Is this what you're looking for, Clyde?" His eyes lit up with greed. "That's it. Give it to me." "It's not yours," she said, her voice ringing out in the quiet twilight. "It never was. This land belongs to the Kane family." "It's a piece of paper," he yelled, his frustration boiling over. "It doesn't mean anything." "It means everything," she said. "It means your whole life, your family's name, is built on a lie. And it's over." And then she did something no one expected. With Clyde and the whole town watching, she walked over to the small fire she kept burning in the yard. "No!" Clyde screamed, realizing what she was about to do. She held the deed over the flames. "You don't get to hurt anyone else," she said, her voice clear and strong. "You don't get to own me, and you don't get this." And she dropped the papers into the fire. The old brittle deed caught instantly, curling into black ash. The proof was gone. The map, the signature, all of it turned to smoke. Clyde stared, his face a mask of utter disbelief. He had lost. He had no claim, no proof, nothing. The foundation of his world had just been turned to ash. His rage was volcanic. He drew his gun, but he was too slow. A shot rang out, but it wasn't from Clyde. It was from Marshall Boone. The bullet kicked up the dirt right at Clyde's feet. At the same time, Jedediah was on the porch, his own rifle leveled, his aim steady. Clyde was outmaneuvered and outgunned. His hired men looked at each other, then at the silent, armed townspeople. This wasn't a fight they could win. It wasn't worth the money. One by one, they lowered their guns. It was over. Clyde stood there, defeated, his gun hanging uselessly in his hand. The power he had wielded his whole life was gone. He looked at Evelyn, and in his eyes, she saw nothing but empty, pathetic hatred. "Get out of our town," Marshall Boone said, his voice like cold iron. Without another word, Clyde turned, got on his horse, and rode away, his men following like beaten dogs. He didn't look back. The town was silent for a moment, and then someone started to clap. Soon, the whole street was filled with applause. They weren't just clapping for her, they were clapping for themselves. For the moment, they chose to stand together. Jedediah came down from the porch and stood beside her, watching the flames consume the last of the past. The physical proof was gone, but it didn't matter. The truth had been spoken. Justice had been served, not by a court, but by a community. "You destroyed it," he said, his voice full of awe. "My only claim to that land." She looked at him, the firelight dancing in her eyes, making her scars seem like marks of victory. "The land was never the point," she said. "It was about being free." He looked from her face to the faces of the townspeople who were slowly, shyly approaching. He saw Rosemary with a rare smile on her face. He saw Doc Ree give a respectful nod. He realized she was right. Today, something more valuable than land had been won. He finally understood. He had started by trying to save the ghost of his wife. But Evelyn Crowther didn't need saving. She just needed a place to stand and fight for herself. And in doing so, she had saved him from his own ghosts. He reached out and, for the first time, took her hand. Not her gloved hand, but her scarred one. Her skin was warm from the fire. It felt real. It felt like home. "You're right," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "It was never about the land." The prairie wind blew through the town, carrying away the smoke and the silence. It felt like a cleansing breath. Evelyn stood there, surrounded by the quiet strength of the man beside her and the town that had become her own, and she knew she was finally, truly free. The past was ash. The future was an open prairie, waiting for her to build on it. If you enjoyed this story of courage and redemption, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you don't miss our next video. We'd love to hear what you think in the comments below. What was the moment that stood out most to you? Thanks for watching.